Alright, good afternoon everyone. We're going to be taking a look at 3.3 notes for slopes of lines. The first thing we want to go back is just refresh some algebra here. The slope of a line, and we note that as the letter M. Okay, so we know that a slope is the letter M, is when we contain 2 points with these coordinates. So we have our first coordinate. We have an x and a y value for the first coordinate, so we use x sub 1 and y sub 1. Then I have a second pair of coordinates, x and y. So since these are my second pair, that's why I do x sub 2 and y sub 2, right? So when we are given this, we can have a formula where y sub 2 minus y sub 1 over x sub 2 minus x sub 1. We know that this is the change in our y over our change in x. It is also known as our rise over our run, right? And this is just a little refresher to help us know, how do we get slope? Well, what I do is I always take my coordinates and I'm going to label them x1, y1. So I have my 0, 0, x1, y1. I have a second coordinate, so I label it x2, y2. So I'm taking a look at that. Right? I now then look at my y sub 2 minus y sub 1 formula. Well, what is y sub 2? It is 8 minus my y sub 1. I'm following my formula. 0 is y sub 1. X sub 2 is negative 2 minus x sub 1, 0. So all I did is I followed my exact formula, and I took whatever I had labeled and plugged it into those spots. 8 minus 0 is 8. Negative 2 minus 0 is negative 2. This simplifies down to negative 4. So I have M a slope of negative 4 for this question. Right? Same thing. x1, y1. x2, y2. Make sure you're not doing the common mistake that I see people doing. They label x1 and x2. That is not right. It is always x, comma, y. Whenever we have a value, it is always x, comma, y. So why did I put a 1? As I am putting it for my first pair, right? Just a reminder, we always make that mistake. Alright, so if I have y sub 2, it is negative 5. Minus, go ahead and put our sign in there. Y sub 1. Well, what is y sub 1? It's negative 3. Well, that's why I put my sign there already, because my equation has the sign. So I'm going to do minus what? Negative 3, so I'm going to include the negative sign. Right? We can talk about how to solve that in a second. Now my next one is x sub 2, which is 3, minus, what is x sub 1? Negative 2. So I add that sign again. Right? So I do not want to take away what is needing to be there or add in something that doesn't need to be. So here, all of my double negatives turn into a positive. So negative 5 plus 3 ends up being negative 2. 3 plus 2 is 5. So I have a slope of M, negative 2 over 5. All right, and our last one, I can do x1, y1, x2, y2, which means I'm going to have negative 3 minus 1. X sub 2 is 2 minus x sub 1, which is 2. Well, let's solve out here. Negative 3 minus 1 is negative 4. 2 minus 2 is 0. Well, what happens when 0 is on the bottom? It is considered to be undefined slope. Okay? So what this does is it just reduces down to an undefined slope. So when 0 is on the bottom, we have undefined slope. Just something that we need to help and memorize and know. Okay? So that's just solving. We just got to practice of doing a bunch of slopes. Remember, this is just an equation that we did all the time in algebra. Alright, so now let's find the slope of each line. Well, what do I do for slope? I know it's my rise over my run. If I go rise, if I go up, that means I am moving positively. If I rise down, it means negative. And then the same thing with my running. I always want to run to the right when we do this to create positive values for my bottom half all the time. Or like I said, if you're running to the left, then I know that is negative. But I just use, in my own rhythm, positive so I don't mess it up. All right, so I'm going to find slope line A. So I find line A, and I'm going to pick a point and then find it to another point. So I want to go to the right, right? So if I notice, I'm going to rise only one dot. So I'm trying to count from this dot to this dot here. Well, I only have to go one up. So I'm going to have rise over how much I'm running. Well, I move 2 to the right, so my run is 2. So there's my slope. 1 over 2, rise 1, run 2. All right, let's do it for my next one. If I look at B, I am also picking another dot and another dot on that line, and I'm going up 1, to the right 2. So again, I have a slope 1 over 2. In C, I'm going to find C. I notice C is this line going up and down here. Well, let's pick one dot. I go up 2 this time, and I only run 1 to the right. So I have 2 over 1. Well, that reduces down to just 2. And then D. Well, D is this line going here. Well, this time I'm going down 2. So I'm going to represent it with -2 going down. And I move to the right 1. Well, again, even though that this is going down, I'm moving 1 to the right. My 1 value on my run is positive still. Well, what is -2 over 1 reduced down to? -2 this time. Well, is our line going from left to right going down? Yes, it is. Now let's compare the lines that we have. We know that A and B have the same slopes. So what does it mean when they have the same slope? It means that the lines are parallel when they are exactly the same. So we can say exact same slopes mean parallel lines. Okay? So us finding these rise over run on our graph, or if I'm just finding them based on my formula, I know that if I have the same rise over run or slope, right, that is going to be parallel, right? If it is perpendicular, the word that we use to call it is called opposite reciprocals. And when you do opposite reciprocals, we have to do 2 things. Okay? I have to flip the sign. So that means if it was negative, it goes to positive. If it was positive, it goes to negative. So I'm flipping the sign no matter what. And I flip the number or my fraction, right? So just know every slope, even if it was 2, right? That's not a fraction. Well, what is its true fraction? 2 over 1. So every whole number is over 1. So if I flipped this fraction, it would be 1 over 2, right? So no, even if it's not a fraction, it's always over 1 if it's not a fraction. Alright, so I know that's a long way to describe that, but that's just something that might help us. But to have a fraction, if it's not always over 1, right, we can always flip it and have it over 1 if we do it. So we notice I have a given slope of 2 over 3. Well, what does the slope have to be when it's parallel? It has to be the same. Well, what's the same as 2 over 3? 2 over 3 is -4, the same thing as -4. Well, let's write it over 1 since I know there's no difference in it. It's the exact same. I can just write it a little bit differently. My next one, -1 over 4, is the same thing. -1 over 4. And then 2, I can write that over 1. Why am I doing that? Is because a slope that is perpendicular does what? It does 2 things. Flip the sign and flip the fraction. So if I wanted to flip 2 over 3, it would now become 3 over 2. I flipped the fraction. I also have to flip the sign. So if this was positive, it is now negative. So why did I do this in these questions? Was I know now this is a fraction, and so I can easily flip this. So this is negative 4 over 1. I can write 1 over negative 4. Well, I flipped it, but did I also flip the sign? No. My negative turns now to a positive, so I have a positive 1 over 4. It does not matter if the positive is out in front or in our fraction, it's the same thing. Okay. Here, negative 1 over 4 changes to 4 over negative 1, and I know that is positive, so I'm not even going to write that negative symbol in there. I'm just going to write 4 over 1. Or I could just write 4. 2 over 1, flip it to now 1 over 2, and I flip the sign to negative 1/2. Alright, so just identifying how do I flip these. If it is this number, what do I flip it to? Know that we have to do both of those items every single time. Alright, so let's get on to the back side now. We are going to look at determining whether we have this line be parallel, perpendicular, or neither. Well, if it's parallel, I will have slopes that are the same. If I have slopes that are perpendicular, it means that happened of one of two things, which is called an opposite reciprocal. Or if they're neither, that means that they don't the same or they aren't opposite reciprocals. So what I need to do is I first need to find the slope of A to B. So I need to do my y sub 2 minus y sub 1 over x sub 2 minus x sub 1. Okay, so I'm just writing down my slope formula. All right, no, it's focusing. It's okay. Don't freak out. Just wait and make sure it gets there. It's all right. Now it's working. So I know negative 7 is my second coordinates. Why? Well, how do I know? We can confirm by labeling them. So I put a y2 above my negative 7, so I know that I'm going to write negative 7 minus, what is y1? It's 3 over 5 x sub 2 minus 0, which is my x sub 1. So negative 7 over, minus negative 3 gets me negative 10 over 5. And this reduces down to just negative 2. Okay, so I know my first slope is negative 2. So I'm not trying to do anything with the next one. I just want to see what the next one is. So let's do for m and n. I'm going to do the same equation, so I don't want to write it down again. And I know that I'm going to do y sub 2, which is negative 1, minus y sub 1, which is 7. X sub 2 minus x sub 1, so my x sub 2 is negative 2 minus negative 6. Now that I have it down correctly and plugged into my equation, I can just solve. Negative 1 minus 1 is, oh sorry, minus 7. That's my fault. I don't know why I wrote a 1. That was supposed to be a 7. That's right there. Negative 1 minus 7 turns into negative 8. Negative 2 minus negative 6 now turns into a plus, and that just turns into 4. Well, negative 8 over 4 is also negative 2. So if this is negative 2 and this is negative 2, is my slope parallel, perpendicular, or neither? Well, those are the same numbers, so I know that these two are parallel with each other. Okay? Alright, let's do the same thing that we just did, now with a different pair of coordinates. I'm going to label x sub 1, y sub 1, x sub 2, y sub 2, and let's go ahead and punch these out. AB is now going to be negative 6 minus negative 8. X sub 2 is 4 minus x sub 1, which is negative 4. So when I solve this out, this changes into a plus sign there. I get 2 on top, and I get a plus sign there, so 4 plus 4 is 8. This reduced down to 1 over 4. So there's my fraction, or my slope of my first line. So now let's do it for m and n. My y sub 2, negative 3, minus my positive 5. And then I got negative 1, which is my x sub 2, minus negative 3. So that turns into a positive there. Alright, so let's do negative 3 minus 5, negative 8. Negative 1 plus 3 is 2. Negative 8 over 2 reduces down to negative 4. Well, if I have 1 over 4 and negative 4 over 1, well, is this the same? No, so it's not parallel. Is it perpendicular? Well, we need them to be opposite reciprocals. Well, if I were to change and flip the sign and flip the fraction, what would it look like? It would be 4 over 1, and then I would change it from a positive to a negative. Well, does this represent that number there? Yes, it does. So we are going to say that it is a perpendicular slope between the two of them. Okay, so all we are doing is finding the slope of both of these lines and then classifying them. Are the lines parallel? Are they perpendicular? And then answer this. If I had 1 over 4, and let's say this came out to be negative 7, I know it's not the same number, right? I did flip my sign, but I didn't do any of the classifications for it being the same or opposite reciprocals, therefore then it would be neither. Okay, so if you have a neither, that means you already said it is not the same, and I did not flip it and flip the sign. Okay, so you have to do a double whammy for those perpendicular slopes. All right, if I want to pull out a slope from an equation, I look at where it is in my spot of the y is equal to mx plus b. Well, m is in front of the x, so I can compare my numbers. I notice that negative 1 over 2, sorry I made that worse by circling it, 1 over 2 negative can flip to a positive 2 over 1. Well, is this 2 over 1? Yeah. So if I did that, it would be perpendicular. So I have perpendicular slopes right there. Here, I know this is 3 and this is negative 3, so it's not parallel because they're not the same. Is it perpendicular? Well, I flipped the sign, but did I flip my fraction? So no, this one is going to be neither because it is not parallel and it didn't meet both qualifications for perpendicular. Remember, it has to meet both for them to be perpendicular. Okay? My last one, if there is an x over a 7, that means there's an imaginary 1 over a 7. This one also has 1 over 7 in front of the x. Are those the same fractions? Yes, so it is parallel. All right, my last little bit for us to look at is we want to graph the line for our next piece. All right, so let's take a look. It says, graph the line which satisfies each condition where it contains y is 3, 0, parallel to dj, where d to j is negative 3, 1, and j is 3, 3. Well, they gave me 2 points in a line, so I'm going to go ahead and graph those. Negative 3, positive 1 is d. J is at 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Well, let's see. From D to J, what is my slope of that line? Well, I go 1, 2 up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to the right. So I know that I have a rise over run of 1 over 3. Okay? So I want to have a line that is at 3, 0, 1, 2, 3. Now where does this other point need to be if I want to make it parallel? Well, let's go backwards of that. So since I went 2 up, I'm going to go 2 down. All right, I'm using this one as well. It doesn't matter which one you use, but I'm using this one. So before I went 2 up, so if I want to go backwards, I'd go 2 down. Since we went 6 to the right, I'm now going to go 6 to the left. All right, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I connect my dots. I have now drawn 2 lines that are parallel to each other. All right, or you can think of this backwards from J. I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to the left and 2 down. So I want to do the same thing, 6 to the left and 2 down, and that's how I know I have a point that makes this other line parallel. Right, if I want to find it perpendicular, we can do the same thought process we just did, except what are the things I need to do to my slope that I get? Well, I need to do flip of the fraction and I need to flip the sign. So I know I want to go ahead and plot C at 0, 3. I want to plot X at 2, -1. So let's see what my slope of CX is. 1, 2, 3, 4 down. 1, 2 to the right. So I don't even want to flip that or do anything yet. I don't want to simplify that. Let's just leave it as is, because I can just flip that. Alright, so I know it's -4 over 2. Alright, so now if I want to flip that, I need to flip it to a positive 2 over 4, which can reduce down to 1/2. Alright, so I know that this line cuts through like this, and it has that slope. Well, let's pick point X, and now let's move this slope away from that point. Up 1 over 2. If I connect those two dots, I have now created a perpendicular line to my original line. You have now 3.3 assignments on Canvas, and it will be a combination of problems from 3.2, which was yesterday, since yesterday was a no homework night. So please make sure that you are looking back to yesterday's notes and to today's notes for today's assignment. It will be due on Tuesday when you get back by midnight, since this will be a 3-day weekend.